The story begins in an abandoned construction place in the middle of the night. We see a boy being surrounded by a group of evil people who are armed with dangerous weapons while hanging above a cage full of zombies who are eager to eat the boy. We learn that the boy's name is Jong Zioyong. The woman asks if life is meaningless for him now because all of his friends are dead while she asks that. The cold sweat drips all over his face, and Jong remembers the good times he had in the past with his friends, and says to himself that it is all my fault that you guys ended up like that, and regrets that things went that way. Jong gets mad and screams at the evil woman that she deserves a miserable death, and that how a person can do something like that to fellow humans. The evil woman with a satisfied face is clinging to a man with a good build, and while she does so, she says that Jong is angry at her again. The man suggests to torture him slowly so she can vent her anger at him for having such a foul mouth. The man thanks Jong for the supplies, and because of the supplies they can live a comfortably live for a few more months before the supplies run out. But while he does so, he clicks a button, and so because of that, Jong falls with full force to the ground in the cage full of zombies who immediately get alerted by his presence. The zombies who are starving are running with full speed to Jong, and once they get to Jong, they begin to eat him alive, while we see that Jong is coughing up blood because of the damage he is getting. Jong thinks to himself that if he had another chance to live again, he would make better use of it, and that he would make them pay for what they did to him and his friends so that he would never experience something like that again in his life. Jong, who wakes up again after experiencing something terrible, gets called upon by the same evil woman who betrayed him in his previous life, and while the woman screams that he didn't put her name to the house deed, he couldn't grasp the situation he is in right now because he thought to himself that he had died just a second ago. Jong looks around and thinks to himself that could it be that I have been reborn before the time of the apocalypse and that they gave me a chain to redo life. He says that in his last life he has been deceived by Qi Jing. We learn that she stole the inheritance left by his parents and made him homeless, and because of that he had to sleep on the streets in the cold weather. We also learned that later that time a global catastrophe occurred, so because of that most people were turned into zombies and plunging the world into chaos. With the help of friends he survived and built a safe zone to survive the apocalypse until it is safe to walk around again. But he couldn't have known that the deceitful Qi Jing pretended to be a desperate person seeking his refuge and sympathy. In the end, she betrayed him and let the enemy inside to destroy him and his friends. We move back to his house where Qi Jing is screaming at him while saying 400,000 yuan and not a penny less. Jong, with a serious face expression, stays silent while looking at her. The evil woman gets angry and asks if he heard her. Jong thinks to himself that he cannot act impulsively now, so he needs to wait when it is the right moment. The evil woman says that she will give him a week time for him to make everything right, but Jong cuts her off and says fine, I got it, so she needs to go while pushing her to the door. This shocked the evil woman a bit and thinks to herself that when did Jong become so assertive, and asks if he wasn't her lackey before. Jong closes the door and turns around. But while he does so, he looks at the clock and thinks to himself that he must prepare for the impending apocalypse that is going to happen in a month's time, because if he doesn't, the same will happen like last time. Jong gets shocked, and we see a system alert saying the apocalypse system is now active. We also see several system missions saying own a piece of land to get 10 points as system rewards for completing the mission. Jong asks in a surprised tone what those points can be used for once he completes a mission, and how he will be able to use them. We learn that there is a system store displaying different types of items which can be bought with system points he earns from mission rewards. We learn that in his previous life, he saved every penny he got to save up for the evil's woman bride price, which left him malnourished. Jong picks up his phone and gets a message saying, "Are you full?" And he thinks to himself that the zombies will be everywhere in a month's time, so he should eat good food until that happens. We move to an expensive-looking building. We see nice-looking food on the table, and Jong asks to himself if this is the legendary Michelin 3-star expensive takeaway. He wonders what a 300 yuan braised pork tastes like. While he puts the food in his mouth, his face expression turns into happiness after trying it. Then he screams that the food is unbelievably delicious. We see that the neck is enjoying his food like a pig, but gets surprised to hear a message from his phone when he is just enjoying his food. We see that he is being called by the friend of the evil women. He thinks to himself if that manipulative woman cried to her friend again, and sighs at the view of the name on the phone. The friend gets angry at Jong for treating her friend like that, and says that she only wanted him to prove his love to her. She also says that if you can't give her property, how can you love her, which is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. She says that Qi Jing was testing him a little and that he failed miserable, but if he brings 1 million by the end of the day in cash to them, she might help him to get her back to him. Zhang gets angry at her and says, "Who do you think you are for testing me like that?" and that she needs to get lost. The friend is trying to respond, but Zhang ends the call before she can do so. Zhang lays back on the couch and thinks to himself that he will build the strongest fortress on this land where no one dares to come, but not only is it becoming defensive, it is also built next to a water source and forest, so he will not run out of water that easily. We move to a hall full of people who are walking where the Mig gets greeted by a woman while she asks what he is looking for. The Mig tries to respond to the woman, but gets cut off by a man who we learn is the real estate manager of this place. The real estate manager asks the woman to help the others move boxes in the back because they have a lot of toilet paper that needs to be dealt with. The woman tries to respond to her boss, but gets cut off before she could do so. The real estate manager asks if she has forgotten who taught her everything in this field of work, and with an angry tone sends her to the back to help. The manager turns around and says to the Mick that a broke loser in cheap clothes can't even afford a toilet, let alone a house to life in. The Mick, his face expression turns dark and gets angry, so he asks the real estate manager if he is looking down on people or if he is just an evil person. The real estate manager says that he looks down on dogs like him, and he further says that if the Mick can afford a toilet, he will live stream himself eating shit. Zhang says to the real estate manager that he will find some fresh, hot, steaming ones for him later to eat on stream. Zhang comes back to business and tells the lady worker that he is not here to buy a house, but to buy land for himself, saying this with a confident face. The real estate manager and the lady worker can't believe their eyes when Zhang pulls out a black pay card, and cold sweat drips from their faces. Every customer in the building is shocked beyond belief, so they are asking what Zhang means by buying land and if he knows how much money it will take to purchase a piece of land. Another customer explains that he has never seen anyone buy land so easily. They exclaim that Zhang must be a wealthy person to buy such expensive land. The lady worker still cannot believe her eyes and asks Zhang to please follow her because she will give him the best detailed introduction available. While they are walking away, the real estate manager, with an annoyed expression, says that everyone knows how to brag, but he is not capable of paying for such expensive land. Zhang takes a seat on a chair provided by the lady worker, who further explains that these are the land pieces they currently have available, so Zhang needs to look carefully at which piece of land he wishes to buy. Zhang explains that there is no need to do so, and that he will just explain what kind of requirements he needs for his land. After that, she will need to look for the land that fits his requirements. Zhang further explains his requirements, such as proximity to mountains and water, so he has a water source. He also specifies that it needs to have convenient transportation and should have large buildings on top of it. The lady worker thinks hard before she answers, but is interrupted by the real estate manager, who adds that there is a piece of land in the East District that fits Zhang's requirements. The lady worker asks in a surprised tone why he suggests the East District, as there are still unfinished factory projects there and they cannot sell such land to a client. The real estate manager becomes angry and says that this broke loser's requirements are outrageous and that he is not here to buy an expensive piece of land, but to cause trouble for them. Young is surprised to hear that there is a piece of land that fits his requirements and asks the lady worker for confirmation. She responds positively but further explains that there are still unfinished factory projects because the construction team leader ran off, and there is no one to finish the work in time. Zhang thinks to himself that it is a great location because it fits all of his requirements. He further says that if he puts up barbed wire, it will be easy to defend, and the unfinished factories will also save him a lot of money. Zhang tells the lady worker that he will take that piece of land and would like to make a contract now so he can pay right away. The lady worker takes the papers back from Zhang and says in a scared tone that they are sorry for offering something like that. However, after she hears his response, she gets a shocked expression on her face and asks Zhang if he really plans to buy land with unfinished projects. Zhang confirms that he does and says that someone is waiting to eat some fresh poop later, so they should hurry with the contract and down payment, while the real estate manager is sweating cold drops of sweat. A while later, we see the real estate manager holding a receipt and saying that it is impossible. He further says with a dumbfounded face that he really paid a $300,000 down payment and questions how someone can buy such expensive land with unfinished projects on it. Jong explains to the real estate manager, who still cannot believe his eyes, that he made the down payment and that it is up to him to perform in front of the camera, so he should at least enjoy it. Having had enough, Jong walks away, while other customers tell the real estate manager that they have turned on the live stream, so he needs to hurry up. Another customer adds that his stomach doesn't feel good, but promises that it will be fresh for him. Jong thinks to himself that he has spent all the bride money on buying that piece of land, but now he needs to figure out how to get money to stockpile supplies for himself. As Jong ponders, a fat man walks past him and wonders if that was indeed Jang. The fat man continues to his destination, but is surprised to see the real estate manager being forced to eat poop after making a deal with Jong. The real estate manager, in a state of shock, protests that he doesn't want to eat poop, but the people ignore him and keep putting the poop in his mouth. The fat man, now angry, exclaims about what the hell is happening in his absence. We then move to the evil woman, who is meticulously doing her nails. She receives a call from the fat man and answers, greeting him and asking if he remembers her. The fat man cuts her off, asking if she knew that Jong went to the real estate company to buy an expensive piece of land. The evil woman gets upset and asks how a broke loser like Jong could afford something so costly. The fat man explains that it was a $300,000 down payment, so he must have used the bride money. The evil woman becomes even more upset, fuming about how Jong could use her money, but the fat man calms her down and tells her she needs to figure out what's going on with him. The evil woman says that she will expose Jong online for using her money, and for doing so behind her back. We then return to Jong, who thinks to himself that buying supplies and building a base requires a lot of money, and he doesn't know where he can get such an amount when he's broke. Suddenly, there's a loud bang on the door, which surprises Jong. It turns out to be the evil woman with her friend. Jong asks what they are doing there, but the evil woman cuts him off, accusing him of spending her money behind her back. Jong is dumbfounded and asks what she means, but the evil woman insists that she knows everything, including how he used her bride money to buy a piece of land, and since it was her money, the land now belongs to her. Jong becomes angry and asks if she has suddenly gone crazy. He explains that he has plenty of money while slapping her with a stack of cash. As the evil woman looks on in disbelief, Jong makes it clear that he will never give her anything and asks if he's dumb for knowing that she has been having an affair with the fat man for a long time. The evil woman begins to sweat coldly, wondering how Jong found out about the affair. Her friend jumps in, saying that it's just a misunderstanding between a couple and that they need to take it easy. Jong interrupts, stating that there is no misunderstanding and that a cheating woman like her is not his girlfriend. He tells her to go back to the fat man and, irritated by her presence, slams the door in their faces. The evil woman, left outside, thinks to herself about how Jang knows about the affair since they were very discreet when booking rooms. The evil woman and her friend start to leave, but the friend stops her and asks if Jong told the truth about her affair with the fat man and why she didn't mention it before they confronted Jong. The evil woman uses the excuse that they only booked a room a few times. The friend, concerned about how everything has spiraled out of control, suggests that they should go back and come up with a plan to handle Jong. The evil woman agrees, saying that it is the only thing they can do at the moment. However, the friend thinks to herself that since the evil woman messed up with Jong, she now has a chance to claim Jong for herself. After all, they are good sisters, but she's not holding back. We then move back to the construction site where Jong has bought the land. Jong is asking a middle-aged man how long the renovations will take to complete. The middle-aged man, clearly perplexed, asks Jong what kind of force he has offended to require such extensive renovations. Jong explains that he doesn't need to know the details and that asking too many questions isn't helpful. He then inquires about the cost to complete the work within a month. The middle-aged man tries to explain that it's impossible to finish in a month, but is cut off by Jong, who says that if he doesn't want to do it, he'll find someone who will. The middle-aged man reluctantly agrees, but clarifies that his concern isn't the timeline, but the cost that will need to be paid. Jong asks what the price will be, and the middle-aged man explains that because the construction needs to be expedited and the work intensity will increase, the cost will need to be at least this amount. Jong, surprised, asks if $20 million is enough. The middle-aged man confirms that it is and adds that Jong needs to pay a $5 million deposit before they can start building. Jong says he will transfer the money within a week and instructs them to hurry up with the construction. The middle-aged man tries to respond, but is cut off by Jong, who adds that if the deposit isn't paid, the land will be his, so the man shouldn't worry about the payment. The middle-aged man agrees and acknowledges Jong's terms. Suddenly, the friend of the evil woman calls out to Jong. He turns around with a confused look on his face. The friend clings to Jong's arm and asks him what he is doing there. As the crazy witch's friend clings to Jong innocently, she asks him what he's doing there. Jong looks down at her in anger and remembers that she was the one who persuaded the crazy woman to swindle him out of his family's property in his past life. He swore to pay her back twice the misery he suffered, with his face still filled with rage. The friend, on the other hand, was still asking what he was doing there while trying to act like a good girl. She asked him if this was the land he bought and complimented the scenery, calling it a very nice place. She then asked if he planned to build there, while desperately squeezing her melons against his arms. Jong pushed her away and told her that whatever he was building had nothing to do with her. The girl was completely shocked at his actions. She didn't think a pathetic loser would have the mind to push away a hot chick like her. She asked herself what was going on and didn't understand why Jong was acting so weird that day. In a normal circumstance, just touching her hand would make him blush and his heart race. But now he was completely irritated by her presence. Even after deliberately caressing his hands, he still had no reaction towards her. While she was angry and nervous, Jong went ahead to talk with the construction workers and told them that the gates needed to be expanded. The crazy girl's friend called out to him, but he just ignored her like a piece of garbage. Since he had broken up with Kiwi Juing, the friend didn't want to miss the opportunity to take Jong for herself. She saw it as a golden opportunity for the land to be hers. She gritted her teeth and clutched her hand in desperation as she thought about how to make things work in her favor. Back at Jong's home, he sat down on his couch with the documents of his newly bought land laid out on the table. He said that he had pledged the house to the bank, but it only got him $3 million, which wasn't nearly enough for the first phase of the construction. He needed to figure out how to get more money into his broke pockets. With a serious look on his face, he thought that since the apocalypse was coming soon, it wouldn't matter if he sold the house multiple times, and then concluded that he would do just that. Suddenly, he heard loud bangs at his door and a voice yelling at him to open it. As he walked to open the door, he said the voice belonged to his downstairs neighbor, Grandpa Lai. The old, rickety man was a nuisance who had some money, and he owned the first and second floors of the building where Jian lived. Lai also wanted to buy Jong's third floor, but the house was meant to be his matrimonial home, which was why he didn't want to sell it. As Jong grabbed the door handle, he said that the old man was always causing a ruckus, splashing paint, dumping garbage, placing funeral wreaths, and jamming the locks. He opened the door, and Grandpa Lai immediately accused him of going clubbing the previous night. Jong yelled back at the man and asked if he was done with his silly theatrics. He told the man that he went to bed before 10 last night, so there was no way he could have gone clubbing. Lai said that he didn't care and that he heard something, but Jong cut him off and told the old man to stop his annoying rambling. He was fed up with Lai and his crazy stunts. Since the old man wanted the house, Jong said that he'd sell it to him. The old man was completely stunned and asked Jong if he was really serious. Jong looked down at the monkey-faced old man and said that he'd sell it on one condition, and Lai asked what it was. He told the old man that his new house wouldn't be ready until after 6 months, so he needed to stay there for that amount of time. Before that, the old man would have to pay him a total of $5 million for the house all at once. With that, he'd be able to pay off the loan on his new house. Lai was about to respond, but Jong cut him off and said that if he didn't agree, then he should forget it, while slowly closing his door. Lai stopped the door, pushed his head in, and nervously said that they'd have to sign a contract to avoid any regrets. Jong looked really irritated as he looked at the ugly old man and told him that the contract wouldn't be a problem. Of course, with a plague coming in a month's time, Jong had successfully swindled the old fool. He closed his door and cursed the old man out, telling him to stay in his house and wait to meet his maker. Jong began going through his phone, calculating the old man's 5 million together with the 3 million loan, which came to a total of 8 million. The system popped up and showed that he had completed the first task of owning a piece of land. With that, he claimed the system's reward. The next day, he went into the city to complete the next task, which was to get a year's worth of supplies. He breezed through the shopping mall, collecting many items that could be useful to him. The people there thought he was deranged, and some even said the foolish boy should be avoided. They all stood and watched him as he filled numerous carts with supplies that would last him a year. They didn't understand what he was going to do with all that stuff, and some of them even called him a pathetic idiot who believed in doomsday rumors. Jong wasn't bothered by their comments because he already knew what was coming. By the time he had gathered all the items, the task was completed, and the system rewarded him with 10 points. As he looked through the system store, he thought about how enhancing attributes would be useful during the apocalypse, but he was too broke for that. The protagonist supply box was the best thing for him to get with his 10 points. Jong had a pumped-up look on his face as he convinced himself to get the protagonist supply box and expand his advantage immediately. He bought the box, and his 10 points were deducted. The supply box popped out with an infinity symbol on the top of it and question marks around its body. When the box gets unlocked, we see the system information pop up and tell him that he got a level 1 space ring. The ring had a huge spatial space of 500 cubic meters, and time in the space was static. Jong knew the first item he was going to get would be a gold one. With the time-static properties of the ring, it meant that fresh food wouldn't spoil. Jong was happy about this information because he was a good-for-nothing idiot who didn't know how to cook for himself. After that, the system brought up his next task and told him to get supplies for 10 years, with a reward for that being 20 points. As that happened, the store manager walked out with some guards and asked who was causing trouble in his store. He looked like a mangy mutt as he asked Jong to identify himself. Jong recognized him as Yang Tao, his middle school classmate, and a dumb lackey of the school bully, Zhang Shengzhi. Yang always liked to bully weaker people, but couldn't stand up to those stronger than him. We see that in the past, Yang and a couple of other dumb-looking idiots bullied Jong and asked him for a protection fee. During that encounter, Jong told them to screw off, and that Sheng should come collect the money if he wants it. Anyway, he was surprised to run into the same blockhead at the store, much less as a manager. Yang told him to return all the items he put in his cart or else. Jong cut him off and mocked him for still bullying weak people and acting like a useless wimp in front of those stronger than him. He told Yang that he was there to make a purchase and asked if that was how Hurenfa treated its customers. Yang thought he was crazy for actually saying he was going to purchase all those items. He told Yang to pay for them immediately or else he would get rough-handled. An hour later, all his items were scanned, and the cashier printed out the total. As Yang was told the total price by the cashier, he handed out the payment terminal to Jong and yelled at him to pay immediately. With a spark of confidence in his eyes, Jong swiped his card as if he were in a battle. The transfer was successful, but Yang didn't look too happy about that. As he walked away with his guards, Jong called him back. Yang was already pissed off enough, and he asked Jong what he was doing. Jong told him to apologize for his rude behavior, or else he would return all the goods that he just purchased. The store manager felt insulted and told Jong not to push his luck, but the other customers interrupted him and told him to apologize. They told the blockhead that an apology wasn't much, and if he didn't, they wouldn't let it go. One of them had even started recording and was ready to make Yang a famous piece of shit. Jong told him again to apologize, and if he did, Jong said he would buy 10 times the amount of items he had already bought. Yang didn't believe his words, so Jong told him to bring the POS machine so he could show his balance. He swiped his card on it, and Yang was shocked to see that the pathetic weakling he knew had over 7 million. It was an amount that he had never attained in his wretched life. Once again, Jong told him to apologize. With no choice, Yang bowed down like a peasant and said he was sorry. As he bowed, Jong patted him on the head and told him not to be so reckless in the future and to leave room for others. Yang had an utterly defeated look on his face, but he couldn't retaliate since it would only bring more trouble for him. He asked Jong what he was doing with all the things he bought, and the Mick said he was planning a big venture. Yang told him that the supermarket's inventory wouldn't be enough for his venture and that he needed a wholesaler. Zhang turned back his head and asked Yang if he knew some wholesalers since he worked at the store. Surprisingly, the wholesaler he knew was Sheng, the dumb bully who always extorted Zhang in school. Yang quickly called Sheng and told him that he had found a big client. Zhang looked disappointed at the fact that Yang was still Sheng's useless slave. He wondered how much gray income the two of them could have made in the supermarket. After that, Zhang and Yang went to a warehouse. A badass car swiftly drove in and nearly turned Yang into a cadaver. Zhang was angry at how arrogant the driver was. The driver, Sheng, stepped out of the car, smoking a cigarette and puffing the smoke clouds in the air. Yang introduced him to Zhang and asked if he remembered him from their high school days. Sheng proved that all the smoke had clogged up his ears as he made Yang repeat himself. He finally said that he remembered who Zhang was and blew smoke on his face. He referred to Zhang as the guy with a bit of a backbone. He tugged at Zhang's hoodie drawstring and called it a fake designer brand. Sheng said he hated people like him who pretended to be rich when they weren't. Zhang replied by saying that he didn't know if it was a designer brand and that he just bought it from a random store. Sheng grabbed Yang's head and yelled at him for bringing such a useless guy as a client. He told Yang that his time was wasted with Zhang's presence and kicked him in the butt. Yang tried to explain that his client was a really big one, but Sheng didn't believe the idiot's words. He said that he could tell who was rich, and he wasn't because he had been in the business for many years. But it was obvious that his brain and eyes were also clogged up from his rubbish cigarettes. Zhang felt his aura wasn't working and said that he couldn't intimidate illiterates like Sheng Ji, who looked down on people. Sheng arrogantly grabbed him by the collar and told him to repeat what he just said. But Zhang wasn't fazed by the fool. Zhang repeated himself and said that he looked down on people, but Sheng focused on the part where he was called illiterate. Zhang took it that he didn't mind being told that he looked down on people. Yang then tried to calm down the situation and said that Sheng's sore spot was when people called him illiterate because he really was one, and he hated being called that the most. Sheng kicked him to the side like a trash can and told him to shut up since he could talk so well. Then he threatened Zhang by saying that he wouldn't leave there standing if he didn't buy a truckload of goods. Zhang whipped out his phone and told the dumb bully to stop tugging on his collar and show him the account he was going to pay to. Seconds later, he wired $1 million to Sheng, who was surprised to see such an amount of money. He looked completely baffled as he read the transfer details on his phone. Zhang let him know that there was no other reason for him to be there. He said he was going to buy $5 million worth of goods. Then he told Sheng to load up the truck with the rest, and he would pay the balance when the goods were ready. Sheng asked him what kind of goods he wanted, and he replied, saying it was rice, salt, and basically anything that was edible or drinkable. He wanted it all. Then Sheng, with a sly smile on his face, told Zhang to follow him. Unknown to Zhang, Sheng planned to give him a batch of food that was nearly expired. They went into the warehouse, where it was filled with barrels and crates of different kinds of supplies. Sheng offered to give him a 10% discount if he took the whole batch. He was going to stoop to any level to get the goods off his hands. Zhang told him it would depend on the quality of the goods as he walked towards the crates. He got to one of the crates, picked up a brown bag, and began to analyze the item. Looking closely at it, he told Shizheng that everything was nearly expired, except for the outermost layer. Zhang called him a shrewd man for trying to set him up like that. Sheng was surprised that he was able to figure it out. Caught between a rock and a hard place, he then offered Zhang a 50% discount. Zhang told him that there was no need because he was only using the $5 million to buy the best quality goods. He then said that he had other plans for the expired goods, and Sheng wondered what this crazy guy was talking about. Zhang was going to take the nearly expired goods at the 50% discount, but the payment would arrive a month later. Sheng asked what would happen if the goods expired, and he didn't get his payment. But Zhang assured him that he would mortgage his house to him if that happened. Sheng was still curious as to why someone would buy that many nearly expired goods. He asked Zhang what his channel was, to which Zhang replied that the channel was himself. Zhang told him that even expired goods would be worth a fortune in a few days, as he tapped Sheng's shoulder. A cold sweat ran down Sheng's face, and he looked like he had already shit on himself. With a shaky voice, he asked Zhang what he meant. But Zhang told him to stop asking questions and just deliver the goods, and that he would send him the address later. Zhang suddenly got a call, and the voice over the phone asked if he was selling his second-hand house. As he left to take the call, he told Sheng that he had other matters to attend to and that he should take care of the food. He then walked out of the warehouse. Yang, who had been a complete nuisance, asked Sheng if he had scammed him. But Sheng wondered how Zhang was doing so well since his family was short of anything special. Zhang got back home and met Grandpa Lai, who gave him a bag full of money as a deposit. The old man accepted his condition to leave the house in 3 months and asked to sign the contract immediately. Zhang just looked at the old fool and said that he didn't even inspect the house before making a deposit. He was puzzled as to why Lai was so desperate to get the house and asked the old man why he was in such a hurry. Lai, with a sad look on his face, told Zhang that his granddaughter needed to transfer schools, so they urgently needed the house for residency. He had been looking around the area, but only Zhang's house was up for sale, and he begged Zhang not to back out of their deal. Zhang called out the silly man's honesty and asked if he wasn't afraid that he would raise the price after hearing what he just said. Grandpa Lai was shocked at Zhang's words, and he looked like he could have had a heart attack at any moment. He told Zhang that buying the house would cost him their entire family's savings, but Zhang assured him that he wasn't going to back out. After that, they signed the contract, and Lai was relieved that his granddaughter wouldn't have to sleep in the streets like a gutter rat. He bowed like a peasant before leaving and left Zhang to attend to more important matters. As he left, Zhang thought the old man's kind and honest traits would be his doom during the apocalypse. He quickly stopped the man for a second and asked for Lai to give him the address of where he currently lived. The next day, Zhang returned to the construction site to see how his new place was coming along. As he got there, the construction manager asked for the second batch of funds like a hungry ingrate, but Zhang told him that he would transfer the funds soon. The construction manager showed him around the place as they walked inside the building and said that it was between 70 and 80% complete. They stood under the reinforced doors and walls, and he assured Zhang that they were absolutely safe. Zhang asked about the warehouse and was told that it had already been cleaned up and was ready to be used. With that information, he called Sheng with a happy look on his face and told the dumb bully to bring the goods. Moments later, workers began to fill up the warehouse with boxes of supplies. They happily did their work because their boss was paying each person a lot of money. They were a bunch of broke fools, and they needed some way to sustain themselves in their miserable lives, which was about to be cut short by the apocalypse. They commented on how the place looked like a shelter and said that rich people really valued their lives. Zhang directed them and told them to make sure that the perishable goods were stored separately. After a work-filled day, the underpaid interns started leaving the warehouse when night came. As they left, Zhang stood in front of his tower of supplies and was happy to be done with that task. The system showed that he completed the task of acquiring 10 years' worth of supplies and rewarded him with 20 points. As Zhang looked through the system's store, he noticed that there was a new box item there. It was a box that would give him an awakening ability. Zhang was happy at the fact that he would be able to gain abilities before the dawn of the apocalypse since he was a good-for-nothing weakling. He quickly purchased the box, and it gave him the ability known as the Mind's Eye. It would help to detect if another party was hostile or had harmful intentions. Zhang said that it was one of the most useful abilities in the early days of the apocalypse. He would easily be able to tell friends from foe and deal with them accordingly. After that, the system popped his next mission, which was to arm himself. Zhang had a mischievous look on his face as he said that was what he had in mind. It was nighttime at the market, and all sorts of vendors and customers could be seen prancing about, looking for the next best rare item to purchase. For a bunch of fools who were clueless about the apocalypse, everyone there seemed to be eager to get something important. Zhang walked through the streets of the market as he listened to the idle chatter of everyone around. Customers were trying to determine if items were real or fake, and the vendors were tired of dealing with annoying idiots. They all had stern looks on their faces, as if they were all trying not to be intimidated. Zhang's attention was caught by someone who was trying to haggle like a thief. The customer wanted an item for $300, but the vendor couldn't believe the sheer stupidity and asked who did business like that. When he turned back, he saw that the idiotic customer was none other than Lai Shuxing. The fat piece of shit was trying to bring the price of an item from 2,000 to 300. He threatened to leave if the vendor wasn't going to sell it to him at that price. The vendor, trying his best not to punch the idiotic fool in the throat, was trying to calm things down so that they could come to an agreeable price. Eventually, he agreed to sell it to Shuxing at that ridiculous price, just to get him to stop yelling. One of the random people on the streets looked at the vendor as if he were a complete noob who had no spine to stand his ground. Zhong was curious as to why Shuxing was buying fake bracelets on the black market. For someone who likes to brag a lot, Shuxing was nothing but a cheapskate and a silly one at that. He called his crazy ex-girlfriend, Qiui Jing, a fool for falling for a scam. The way he stared at Shuxing showed that he was irritated by the guy's presence. He went back to looking for more items and saw a display of fine swords and machetes. Each blade looked like it could take anyone's head off with ease, but it wasn't just him who stared at the blades with such intent. There were other people passing by who seemed to like slicing and dicing things. Zhong smiled and was happy that he found what he was looking for. He met with the vendor and began examining the blades. With the way he held one of the blades, you'd think this nincompoop actually had experience as a swordsman. Zhong asked the vendor if he had any hard stuff there, and by hard stuff, I'm pretty sure he wasn't talking about their sausages. Anyway, the vendor didn't want to waste time with a loser like Zhong, so he showed the knife sharpener to him and told him to get to work if he wanted something hard. The vendor said that he could also buy a baton if he was too lazy to sharpen the blade himself. Zhong, with a mean look on his face, still insisted that it wasn't hard enough and he needed something harder. Yeah, this whole conversation was getting really sus. The vendor felt annoyed by Zhong's words and questioned if he was there to cause trouble. He had a camouflage jacket on, which gave the impression that he was a veteran who was skilled in taking care of wastes like Zhong. His facial expression changed when he suddenly got a credit alert on his phone. Zhong had transferred a substantial amount of money to the vendor, and this calmed him down. The vendor was shocked to see how much an ugly kid sent to him, and he couldn't believe it. Zhong, with a happy expression, showed that it was he who transferred the money and told the vendor to pipe down. He was serious about getting something hard to satisfy himself. You know what I mean? After that, the vendor told his assistant, Xiaoxiang, to watch the stall, while he directed Zhong to somewhere private where he could get the hard stuff he'd been craving. He said that talking outside was inconvenient and pointed the way to Zhong. Rather than a warehouse, they went to what looked like a casual person's home. I guess he was serious about giving Zhong that hard stuff. I'm just joking. When they got inside the building, the vendor showed him different kinds of homemade guns enough to at least kill chickens, and they were quite cheap too. The ammo and gunpowder were also cheap, but Zhong said it still wasn't good enough for him. At this point, the vendor thought Zhong was just an annoying crackhead. The look on his face said he was tired of dealing with such an annoying customer. He then showed Zhong a replica revolver, and its performance was almost the same as an active-duty handgun. Regardless, it was still stupidly cheap. It was obvious he was trying to sell cheap stuff and keep a huge amount of change for himself. Zhong was furious as he looked down on the vendor and told him that it still wasn't acceptable. He had paid the vendor a lot of money, so all this cheap stuff only got him irritated and upset. He told the vendor that the 200,000 that was sent was just a prepayment. The vendor thought this sick kid had lost his mind, but Zhong, with a stone look on his face, said he was buying weapons worth 2 million. What kind of apocalypse could this loser possibly be preparing for? The vendor had to ask what he did for a living because no normal person would come to purchase that much heavy weaponry. He was probably scared for his meager life as well and didn't want to get on Zhong's bad side. Zhong basically threw his question aside, saying that it was his subordinates who usually handled trivial matters and the vendor didn't need to ask many questions. Seeing how serious Zhong was, the vendor went to lock the doors and close the windows to make sure no one could see or hear them. Luckily, Zhong didn't get defiled after that. The vendor told him that he had come to the right person. He whispered to Zhang that he would give him an address and also told him to write a list. Zhong was to go to the location the day after tomorrow at midnight to complete the transaction, and he was meant to bring cash. As he left the building, he heard the fat fool, Shuxing, calling his name. Just the sound of the idiot's voice made Zhong look like he was going to throw up. Shuxing was surprised to see him on the black market and said that must be why he had been spending lavishly recently. The foolish degenerate obviously wanted all that money for himself. He also called out Zhang for ignoring Jing and also said that his family must have had some heirlooms. He assumed Zhang was there to sell off his inheritance and said he had been watching too many marketing accounts recently, in a mocking tone. Zhang didn't even look bothered by Shuxing's degrading statements. Rather, he saw it as the perfect time to test his mind's eye ability. He activated it, and a blue flame surrounded his eye. He was able to see different icons on the top of the vendor and Shuxing's heads. The icon on the vendor's head looked friendly, while that of Shuxing showed he was definitely an enemy. Zhang was glad that the ability worked as expected. He turned back and began to mock the fat piece of garbage, saying that he must have tricked Ku Jing by buying fake and second-hand goods in order to clap her cheeks. Zhang said that she was just his second hand, who was worth the fake items. Shuxing was infuriated by Zhang's words, but he made no attempt to deny that he was a broke loser who had to buy cheap items to clap a girl. The vendor asked Zhang if they knew each other, and Zhang said that the fat fool was an enemy. Thanks to the money he was offered, the vendor began acting like Zhang's silly lackey and said that he'd handle Shuxing, while Zhang went ahead to handle other matters. The rest of his dumb friends came out to tag along in the drama, and Zhang told him not to kill the fatso since he still had plans for him. Shuxing was already shaking like a chihuahua as the goons slowly walked toward him. He tried to put up a tough attitude, but it was no use. The arms dealer swung out a baton, which made Shuxing try to negotiate with them. The proud fool was now a sacred wimp, and he had probably pissed on himself. The arms dealer and the rest of the goons gave Shuxing the beating of a lifetime. Laying defeated on the floor, Shuxing swore to get back at Zhang for humiliating him. 2 days later, in the dead cold of night, Zhang unveiled his new guns, which were delivered in a truck at his warehouse. With his new arms acquired, his task was complete, and he was awarded 10 points by the system. As a bonus reward, he was also given 2 physical enhancement potions. Rather than an actual potion, it was basically just a syringe, which meant that the system was obviously forcing this guy to do drugs. Anyway, Zhang noticed that the potion's effectiveness was as good as the one in the store. He brought out one of his hands and lifted the other in the air as he got ready to inject it into his body. As he used the potions, he gritted his teeth in pain, and his eyes went completely white. It was either he was feeling ecstatic like a junkie who just got his daily dose, or this idiot was about to die. Luckily, his second chance at life wasn't about to be wasted so easily. According to him, the average adult male had a strength of 5, but with the added 2 points from the potion, he got a 40% increase. He rolled up his fists as if trying to get a good feel of his new strength, but he still looked like the same old useless loser. Still, it wasn't enough for him. Zhang opened up the system's store and looked through the 2 items that were left. He decided to maximize his advantage by buying an extra physical enhancement potion. While injecting himself, he winced like a little girl who was getting touched inappropriately. The extra potions brought him to a total of 8 points, and he had 60% more power than the average person. All that was left was to find a punching bag to test his new powers on. He looked to the wall by his side and saw some bags of cement and a couple of rods on the floor. As he picked up one of the rods, he looked like he was still unsure about his new powers, but there was only one way to find them. He pulled out some sweet Bruce Lee moves as he kicked the rod, bending it and sending it flying towards the wall, which also cracked the wall. With his new strength, Zhang felt like a big bad boss who was not to be messed with in any way. He was sure that he would be able to easily handle early-stage zombies when they showed up. After that, he decided to store the guns in the space ring since they wouldn't take up much space there. The weapon crate shrunk and flew into the ring as if they were being sucked in by a black hole. The day after tomorrow was going to be the first day of the apocalypse, so Zhang was trying to make sure that there was nothing else he had to do. Flashing through his mind was the memory of Grandpa Lai, telling him about his granddaughter and how they needed his house for residency. Zhang felt stupid that he couldn't completely ignore the old man's unfortunate situation, even after suffering at the hands of human treachery. He decided to send the man some essential supplies for the apocalypse, but it was up to the old fool to survive or become a tombstone. Zhang said it was going to be his repayment to the old man for funding his apocalypse plan. The next day, a black car pulled into what looked like an abandoned neighborhood. Jung stepped out of the car and said that whoever was going to look for this filthy slum definitely needed some kind of GPS. He had to walk all the way to the top floor where Grandpa Lai was staying so that he could deliver the supplies. From the looks of it, the old man was a broke fool, and Jung said he had a screw loose in his head for living in such a cheap place. Before knocking on the door, he remembered to take out the supplies from the space ring first, so he wouldn't have to get into a long explanation with the old man. After setting out all the boxes, he knocked on the door, and Lai crawled with his rickety legs to open it. As he opened the door, he already started saying that he would pay his rent by next Monday, but he had no idea who he was talking to at first. It was obvious that there were barely any working brain cells left in the man's head. Seconds later, his eyes sparked open, and he recognized that the person in front of him was Jong. He was even more surprised to see the huge number of boxes that surrounded Jong. It's as if his eyes finally started working well, and he asked Jong what all the boxes were for. Jong said he'd explain later and asked the man to help move all the boxes into his home. They had to be discreet about it so that the nosy neighbors wouldn't think they were doing something illegal. Jong ended up doing most of the moving because the old man was an incompetent piece of garbage. Lai wished he was like the young folk because of how much stamina they had. He said young folk like Jong could move so much stuff in one go without being out of breath. But I'm pretty sure moving just one box nearly sent him 6 feet under. When they were done, check the room and the door to make sure it was sturdy enough. While he was still looking around, he told Lai to listen well to what he was about to say. The old man's eyes and memory were barely working well. He was definitely expecting too much if thought that Lai's ears would be working normally. Jong told Lai that he should use the supplies wisely and that they would last him for half a year. Then a picture caught his attention, while the old man was telling Jong to keep the supplies in his room because they would be moving in soon. Jong didn't even pay any attention to the old man's words. He had given him the supplies, so if the old man wanted to continue being a fool, Jong wasn't going to be bothered. The photo that caught his attention showed Grandpa Lai and a very beautiful, brown-haired young lady. He immediately recognized the pretty girl as Shanshan, probably one of the girls he had clapped in his previous life. Jong didn't think she'd be the crazy old man's granddaughter. He asked Lai if his granddaughter was named Meng Shanshan, and Lai was surprised that he knew who his granddaughter was. He asked Jong how he knew, considering that he had never mentioned her name to him before. Jong's face suddenly turned very cold and serious as he asked Lai where Shanshan was. Now that his hot chick was in the picture, he couldn't possibly abandon her and her grandfather. Lai told him that she was still studying back in their hometown, but once they were able to move into Jong's house, she would come around. In a flashback, we see Jong and Shanshan sitting together, while she puts her head down and cries like an annoying brat. She complained about being the one who caused trouble for her grandfather. Jong had a sad look on his face as the scenes flashed through his mind. He remembered that in his past life, Shanshan said her grandfather risked his life to rescue her from the captured high school. The old man was able to save her, but he met his maker afterward. With that in mind, Jong swore to make it up to her so the same events wouldn't be repeated. He was determined to survive and make babies with her this time around. He told Grandpa Lai that he couldn't move houses anymore. Lai had a shocked expression and probably thought that Jong had completely lost his mind. He thought Jong was going to change his mind and begged the boy to reconsider his decision. But Jong told him that the world was going to fall into ruin the next day and humans were going to be plunged into a cesspit of suffering. The house and his granddaughter's school status weren't going to matter in the face of all this. The old man was confused by Jong's words. He had a perplexed look on his face, thinking that Jong was probably the one with dead brain cells. Either that or the boy was mentally disturbed. Jong told him to guide them to the school where Shanshan was so that they could pick her up, and he would have a new place arranged for them. The only expression that ran through Lai's face was confusion and fear. He told Jong that he sounded like a deranged idiot, and that he had no idea what Jong was talking about. This wasn't making things easy for Jong. He needed to look for a way to explain things to the stupid old man, but he was too old to understand anything, and they were running out of time. He had a very worried expression on his face as he thought about how to handle this. He began to explain the concept of hunger to the old man, something the broke fool should have been quite experienced with. Zhang explained how miserable and terrible the people in the famine era would be. Grandpa Lai didn't understand how such a tragedy could befall those in such a peaceful and prosperous world. He didn't believe such a thing would be possible in their time. With no other choice, Zhang pulled out his ring and sucked all the supplies back into the spatial dimension. The old man was frightened as this happened, and he didn't even know what to say. In the blink of an eye, all the items were gone from the room. Lai asked him what happened to the items and assumed it was some kind of dark magic. A powerful aura surrounded Zhang, and in a forceful tone, he told the old man that he had superpowers and that he could see the future. He said he wanted to live, and he also wanted Shanshan to live so they could make all kinds of happy noises together. Then he stated that from then onwards, everything was going to be done according to his words, and Lai would not be able to defy him. He demanded to be told where Shanshan's school was because there was barely any time left. They left the house and got into Zhang's car, but Lai was still looking at him as if he were an insane villain. They sped through the streets and quickly arrived at the school. Zhang asked the old man if he knew Shanshan's class and dormitory. Luckily, the old man knew, which made him quite useful. I can't imagine the horrors Zhang would have put him through if he decided to be incompetent. They hurried to wherever she was, with the clock ticking away fast. Meanwhile, in the middle of the school, we see a bunch of delinquents harassing a girl for some silly reason. The girl who was being harassed was Shanshan, and she was getting whooped by some illiterate bullies because they were jealous that a guy liked her. Rather than trying to get some good Riz skills so the guy could notice them, they decided to take it out on the poor girl. Shanshan was looking bruised up, and she tried to explain that the guy, Zheng Xiaochen, was the one who liked her, and it was all one-sided. Sadly, the stupid bullies were too dumb to understand, and they thought she was just making excuses. They kicked her and pulled her hair to make up for their low self-esteem. They didn't believe that Xia Cheng was the one desperately trying to get into Shanshan's pants, and they felt she was silly for mocking him. Shanshan made some happy noises as her hair got pulled. I guess that's the kind of thing she was into. A voice called out to the stupid bullies and asked them what they were doing, but the girls looked unimpressed by whoever showed up. Luckily for Shanshan, it was Zhang and her grandfather who came to save her. One of the bullies recognized Lai as the useless grandfather. Shanshan was surprised to see her grandfather and asked why he was at her school. You'd think she'd be grateful to him for coming to save her pathetic butt. He screamed at the bullies and told them to let go of his granddaughter. Zhang, who stood behind him, looked like he was itching to give the stupid girls a piece of his strength. The other dumb-looking guys approached Lai, and they were holding knives and bats. They told the old man not to get into young people's business and he should stop meddling in their affairs. The blonde-haired leader walked up to him with his knife, but the old man stood his ground. Grandpa Lai rushed the guy with the knife and said he was mannerless for bullying his classmates. While they tussled, someone else was about to send Lai to the pearly gates with a bat. He swung down, aiming for Lai's neck, but Zhang caught the bat and saved the man from an early grave. Can you even call it an early grave? Zhang mocked the bully for being so young and learning how to be a thug. Of course, the bullies weren't fazed by Zhang's weak looks. They saw him as another pathetic, broke guy who was trying to act tough and assumed he was Shanshan's little brother. With one kick, Zhang sent one of them flying through the air like a frisbee. Thanks to that, the bullies took him seriously and said that he must have been trained, so they decided to gang up on him together. Their silly tactics didn't rattle Zhang, as he kept a serious look on his face. The idiotic bullies had no idea what they were in for. After circling around him, the one with the bat rushed and swung his weapon, but Zhang quickly ducked to avoid the attack. Thanks to his enhanced strength, his reflexes were off the charts as well. He grabbed the idiot by the collar and tossed him to the ground with one hand. That one quickly got his lights knocked out as his head slammed into the ground. The last one rushed Zhang with his dagger. Zhang weaved through the attack and kicked the fool to the ground, nearly sending him 6 feet under. After he was done dealing with them, the girls started shaking in fear and asked him what he was going to do with them. They thought they were about to get defiled, but their milk jugs just weren't Zhang's type. He slowly walked towards them and started smacking them around the place. He slapped one of them, and she couldn't believe that he would raise his hands on a woman, but to Zhang, she wasn't a woman. She was just an ugly gorilla who liked to bully others. The other one got her hair pulled, and she screamed for Zhang to let go of her. He suddenly pulled out a knife and held it to her neck. Tears filled her eyes, and in a shaky tone, she asked him what he was about to do. He quickly swiped the blade across her neck and gave her a befitting end. Zhang had a devilish look in his eyes after what he had just done. Shanshan and the other bullies couldn't believe their eyes. They didn't think he could have done something so horrid. Anyway, just to let you guys know that he didn't actually kill her. Yeah, I got you with that one. The girl knelt on the ground and cried out because Zhang had cut her hair. Any more cuts, and she would have been looking like a bald freak. To her, it was the worst possible fate she could have imagined. She yelled out in a thundering rage at Zhang, cursing him out and saying that she wouldn't forgive him for daring to cut her hair. Zhang looked down at the fool as if he were her god and told her that long hair would only drag her down. She didn't understand his words, and she was too angry to comprehend anything at the time. He told her that she would understand in a few days and that short hair might actually save her life. Just like that, he killed all hair-pulling fantasies she probably wanted to satisfy in her miserable life. With the girls dealt with, he called Shanshan and her grandfather and said that they were leaving. Shanshan was confused and asked where they were going. Moments later, they got into the car and left. In the car, Shanshan was shocked to hear that she wouldn't be going to school anymore. Her grandfather explained that there was going to be a huge famine soon, and because of that, there was no need for her to sit and listen to boring lectures anymore. They had to do their best to survive. While Shanshan was trying to understand Lai's crazy words, Zhang had a sly smirk on his face as he drove. He was most likely happy that he had secured someone he could feed his chocolate to, and he couldn't get the fantasies out of his head. On the other hand, Shanshan told Lai that he shouldn't be listening to scam calls because she thought the old man had completely lost his mind. Considering his age, she wouldn't be wrong. She argued with him and asked how much he got scammed for, and Lai tried to explain that he was telling the truth. While the two continued arguing, Zhang was just happy to have Shanshan and promised himself to protect her this time around. Then he butted into their conversation and told Shanshan that he was the one who informed her grandfather about the famine and it wasn't a scam. She was just surprised that the idiot could actually talk. Then she nervously asked who he was. Zhang introduced himself and told her that she could call him Brother Yang. Shanshan then thanked him for dealing with the bully, Sun Y, and teaching her silly bunch of stupid lackeys a lesson. Zhang told her not to worry about the fools because they barely had many days left in their useless lives. Shanshan was confused and asked what he meant, and if there was really going to be a famine. Then Zhang told her that he used the concept of famine to explain the situation to Lai's deteriorating brain. Shanshan was glad to hear that because she was sure that there couldn't be a famine in such peaceful times. But he burst her bubble by saying that it was the apocalypse that was actually coming. Now, she was even more nervous as she exclaimed the word apocalypse in confusion. Zhang claimed that the time was right and told her to check her for short videos and the news. He said if nothing unexpected happens, she should start seeing signs of the situation. Shanshan quickly picked up her phone and came across the news of someone with rabies who was biting others like a mad dog. From her phone, you could see some officers trying to hold down the despicable zombie-like person as he struggled to break free. More news came up about a strange smog, and they highlighted that it had a strange smell. Kinda like Zhang, considering that the piece of garbage hasn't showered since the beginning of this book. More screams could be heard from Shanshan's phone as people complained about getting bit by others. Her face was struck with fear. She couldn't believe the horrific events that had started to take place and thought it must have been a dream. She was completely shocked to hear Zhang say that these were all expected events and that they were signs of the beginning of the apocalypse. This idiotic girl still stupidly asked if there was really an apocalypse, even after seeing the signs on her phone. I guess stupidity runs in her family. The next day was going to be the first day of the apocalypse, and the toxic smog would cover several provinces, including Province B. The unknown toxic smog was going to affect all living creatures, and chaos would be slowly unleashed in the world. Slowly, a significant portion of humans would be turned into repulsive, brain-dead zombies, and everything would fall into ruin. People would try to run for their meager lives, but their efforts would be completely useless. Eventually, the zombies would catch up to them and turn them into a McDonald's Happy Meal, eventually turning the innocents into filthy zombies as well. Zhang said that Shanshan should obviously know what zombies were. She obviously did, But the whole story was still too unbelievable for her. Being popped out of school to being told about an apocalypse was the last thing she expected in her life. While they were stuck in a traffic jam, Jong told her that she would believe everything in the coming weeks. By then, she would cling onto his sausage like a desperate ex-girlfriend because he would be her only saving grace. Jong was pissed about the traffic jam and noticed that even the emergency lane was stuck as well.